In a bit we will understand why Vedic tradition consider the material creation to be made up of 5 elements. In a nutshell, the 5 elements come from the fact that human consciousness, which experiences the world, experiences it as 5 dimensions, each dimension based on one sensory perception. And next we present the next row in the set of 20, and the second row with the letters there represents the process of perception. Now if we take any perception, such as let's take the perception of smell. Ear is the sensory organ, and the ear is catching the sound waves. But there is a process, even the scientists say, that the sound waves reach the eardrum, and there is a transition from the sound energy to the nervous energy, and the second row here actually represents the process of perception. And now we add the third row, which is a complement to the cognitive organs, which is shown in the 4th row. The third row represents the conative organs, or the organs that using which the human consciousness is able to move in this world, physical world. And now we are going to get to the next slide and look at the 20 letters in a different way in column form. And here we understand why the Vedic Rishis considered creation, the space of creation, to consist of 5 rudimentary elements, also called Mahabhutas, and what's the logic behind it. In this column we are looking at the column that represents the dimension of taste. So the sensory organ is the tongue, which tastes food, which tastes different tastes, and corresponding element to it is the water element. And the logic behind it is pretty straightforward. Tongue, where there is no saliva, cannot experience taste, and saliva is fluidity, also the water element. And corresponding to the perception of smell is the element earth. It might seem strange that the earth element corresponds to the sensory perception that's to deal with the nostrils. But if we look a little bit deeper, look at what scientists tell us. Scientists tell us that the chemicals, organic chemicals, with which the nose is able to recognize different smells out there, they are some of the biggest molecules that the human nervous system is able to decode. And the other fact is also that these organic molecules are produced and renewed in nature. For example, perfumes are produced by flowers, and perfumes dissipate, but more smell from flowers are created when fresh flowers come out. And if we see the whole earth to be a single organism, it makes sense that the earth element corresponds to the perception of smell. The third one we are going to discuss is the fire element, and this is one of the more obvious one of the elements. When there is no light, one cannot see the objects, the eyes cannot see the objects, and when somebody is blind, they are not able to see the objects either. So there is a one-to-one correspondence between the fire or light element and the eyes. And the fourth column corresponds to the air element, and the perception is touch, and the element is air element. And when a baby is born, one of the first perceptions of the outside world is the sense of touch. And so the skin is the organ that corresponds to the perception of touch, and the element is the air element. And the final one, of course, is the space element, and ears are the sensory organs, and sound is the perception. In the next slide, we will quickly look at why space and ear are connected. Let's look at a couple of scientific facts about space. Scientists say that property of space is that distance can be measured in space, and there is also direction in space. And of course, the eyes can detect both distance and also direction. But what if there is full darkness? Are we not able to detect distance and direction to some extent with the ears? Yes, the ears are able to see from or to judge from what direction a sound is coming, and the ears are also able to judge if an object creating a sound is moving towards or away from it, which is a measure of distance. Now, second scientific idea that we can look at before we understand the idea of space is the theory of relativity. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, there is an observer and there is the observed, and space and time are per the location where an observer is located and also the speed with which an observer is moving. And if we look at the way that the 20 Sanskrit alphabets are arranged into 5 columns and 4 rows, and we see there the relationship between an observer and the observed and the process of observation. All three are contained in the way that these 20 letters are split. And so now we understand that the material space or the physical space has can be described through the last column of 4 letters in it, and each of those from the top represents the space element, the perception by an observer of the space element, and the final row, which is the sensory organ, ear, and then the row right above it, the conative organ, which complements the hearing, or specifically it is the mouth which produces sounds. Now here we can also spend a couple of minutes in understanding the connection between the physical space and modern cosmology. This is called the Big Bang time scale, and on the left side is when our universe was created, and it began as a tiny nucleation bubble, and the bubble expanded within 1 picosecond or 10 to the minus 12. The bubble had inflated to such an extent that the large-scale structures of the universe were created as a road map in it. And so within it were quantum fluctuations. And when the bubble expanded to the present size of the current observable universe, after that it took several thousands of years before stars began to form. Now if we map the three divisions of space or three kinds of space from the Vedic idea to modern cosmology, we can see that the nucleation bubble formed somewhere, and where it formed is the space of consciousness, or the first kind of space. And nucleation bubbles form all over according to scientists, they are forming all over, and they can also collapse. Our universe seems to be very unique in the fact that without collapsing, it went ahead to create all the matter, all the stars and galaxies in it. Quantum physicists and also theoretical physicists believe that several universes are beginning as nucleation bubbles, but some of them are deflating and falling back. Now they ask the question, what is it that enabled our universe to succeed in creating matter? And according to Vedic tradition, according to Naasadeeya Suktam, it is the second kind of space, or mind space. A cosmic mind evolved sometime after the nucleation bubble started inflating, and when the cosmic mind came into picture, it sustained rest of the creation process. In my next talk, I'll be talking more extensively about the three divisions of space, or three kinds of space per Vedic tradition, and how it maps into modern cosmology. So now let's get into how the mapping of the elements of three divisions of space, three kinds of space, is useful in finding meaning of certain words in the Sanskrit language, especially in the Sanskrit language as it's used in Vedic mantras. Here we see on the top left, we see the physical space represented by 20 Sanskrit letters, the middle 4 representing the subtle space, and the final towards the bottom we have the space of consciousness, and there are 12 letters in it, and in between the subtle space and the space of consciousness we find the letter Ma, which we discussed earlier, which represents the individual consciousness or human consciousness. Now we can take a word, for example, Mana. Mana as the Ma, which is the individual consciousness, and Na, which is one of the letters in the manifest space. So Ma to Na represents the movement of consciousness, movement of individual consciousness out into the manifest world. And so Mana represents the mind. Mind is that aspect of human consciousness that probes into the world outside. And the reverse of Mana, Nama, refers to the reverse flow of consciousness, a retrieval of consciousness back from the world of matter into its own self. Another example we can see is the word parna. Parna refers to a leaf, but in actuality it is a reference to photosynthesis. Pa is the first letter in the second space, the space of subtle space, which is actually, we can take it as the life force, which has got ego, intellect, mind, and the psyche. So here there is a connection between the life force and the second letter in Parna is Na, which represents movement. So life force is creating a movement with the help of or Ra, which is in the space of consciousness, and Ra is a reference to energy, radiant energy, and in this case we can take it as photons. So life force takes photons and converts it into movement. In this case the movement refers to the flow of nutrients from the ground through the roots to the leaves, and so leaf is Parna. So similarly you can take specific words in Sanskrit language, especially Vedic Sanskrit, and understand the deeper meaning of that word using letters. So I hope you enjoyed this talk. I hope you will join me on my next talk, which is 3 kinds of spaces per Vedic tradition, and how we can see a correlation of these 3 types of spaces in modern cosmology. Join me for my next talk. This talk is being a live cast on Twitter, Facebook, and also YouTube. So I'll take a couple of questions at this point. The first question relates to where can we find more information about the Sanskrit alphabet and the meaning of individual alphabet. So this was a topic of one of the topic of my research, and I was directed to it by Sri Ravi Shankar, and I found one reference to this in the Tantra text, and particularly the one that I refer to is from the Lakshmi Tantra, which belongs to the Pancharatra tradition. And there is one chapter in it which describes individual letters and their associations to Vedic devatas, and so that was a reference that I used. However, it is a very limited level of research I have done. There is a lot more research to be done in this space, and I hope soon, in 10-15 years, there would be more researchers looking into documents which have not been carefully studied. Now there is a second question here, and this one relates to my first talk. It's from audience member who was also on my first talk, and the person is asking, how did I get my guidance from Sri Ravi Shankar, and if they can meet Sri Ravi Shankar also to receive guidance. And yes, of course, you can meet Sri Ravi Shankar. He's very available. He's a foremost expert on Vedic wisdom in the world today, and you can meet him in any of the talks, events that people organize with him. There is a talk going to be taking place in Sacramento on 16th of April. You can meet him there, and also there is going to be an event in Los Angeles where Sri Ravi Shankar is going to decode an ancient text called Vigyan Bhairav. You can also attend the 2 sessions for it on April 14th and April 15th, and of course Sri Ravi Shankar is going to be in the Bay Area in July also for a silence retreat and Vigyan Bhairav as well. And hope you enjoyed my talk once again, and please join me on my next talk and post your comments, and I will reply to your comments textually.